Awesome. Everybody, welcome Liz Rice and Duffy Cooley from Isovalent. I said that right, I think.
Yep.
Awesome. They are joining us to talk about not just EKS Anywhere, but Cilium and eBPF on EKS Anywhere and what you can do with it. And I'm super excited for this talk because CNIs are there's a lot of them out there nowadays. And Cilium is a very good one, but then the eBPF pieces on top of it are even better. So I'm super excited for this presentation we have coming up next. So, round of introductions. Liz, you want to introduce yourself first? And shout out to our interpreter, Arthur. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, hi Arthur as well. And hi everyone who's watching. Yeah, my name is Liz Rice. I am Chief Open Source Officer at Isovalent, and we are doing all sorts of really exciting things with eBPF, particularly in the Cilium project. We've got some pretty cool things to talk about next week at Kubecon as well. So yeah, I think we're all in the kind of final phases of getting ready for next week, and it's going to be exciting.
Yeah, no, Duffy and Liz are going to both be at KubeCon, I believe, right?
Correct.
Awesome. Yeah, so I'll get to see you all there. Duffy, sorry, cut you off there.
No problem. I'm Duffy Cooley. I'm the field CTO at Isovalent, and like Liz, I'm super, and yourself, Chris. I'll be there at KubeCon all week next week, and I'm super excited about it. We have a couple of things to talk about in this session about how you can kind of come find out more about eBPF, more about Cilium, more about all of those things. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to next week. It's super exciting.
Yeah, Spain. Can't wait. It's been very cold here in Michigan this year.
Yeah. Definitely ready for a tropical day. I guess maybe not tropical, but
it's not quite tropical, but Mediterranean. I'll take
warm.
it.
Yeah.
I understand that a lot of people where Liz is actually go to Spain for just exactly that type of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Here in Europe, Spain is somewhere that you go for the warm. I guess like folks in the US maybe go to the what I would call Caribbean. I think you would say Caribbean.
Yeah.
I guess Spain is the Mediterranean is to us what the Caribbean is for you.
Yeah, pretty much. Sounds like it. Yeah. Awesome. So, what's up at Isovalent?
Getting started here. I think first I'd like to say a little bit about the EKS Anywhere and the Cilium piece. I mean, It's been really great, like actually seeing a lot of adoption. I mean, we've had a good number of conversations with folks who are really kind of stepping up with EKS Anywhere and engaging with it. I've also had some really great conversations with folks at AWS, solutions architects and partner solutions architects that are actually working with people, like really kind of getting folks ramped up on those sorts of things. And that's been awesome. So it's really kind of great to see like better connectivity tissue between like Isovalent as a company and like how people are actually leveraging Cilium in their products today. And I think that's actually at least partially due to a lot of the stuff that we've already seen today. I mean, like some of the projects that are out, that you all have talked about, like being able to actually, have like an application marketplace and like, kind of developing that whole space is I think going to be really helpful to kind of drive adoption of EKS Anywhere. So it seems like it's really taken off. And the next thing I wanted to talk about was that we actually have a blog up on Cilium.io that actually has a whole list of talks around like Cilium talks.
Share your screen if you want.
And Cilium events and stuff. And so I could actually, I guess I could share my screen or I could just talk through it here. What would you prefer?
Your choice.
I think bring it up because then we can all see where we are.
Yeah.
There we go. Oh, Psy's doing it. Never mind.
So if you go over to Cilium.io in our blogs, I mean, there's a ton of really great blog content on there, but this particular set of talks is going to be kind of an intro into what is happening with Isovalent and Cilium next week. We have a ton of stuff happening, and this is just a great way of kind of learning more about Cilium. And that is the base CNI for EKS Anywhere. So if you're interested in like Cilium and how eBPF works and all of that stuff, I really highly recommend come in and check us out. we're going to be at 2 locations on the show floor. We're going to be over by the CNCF booth, and we're going to have a Cilium project booth, because Cilium is a project that has been donated to CNCF. So if you want to learn more about Cilium specifically, definitely come check that booth out. We can walk you through like what's happening with the project and kind of give you a good overview of what Cilium as an OSS project is and what it's actually doing for you underneath your EKS Anywhere cluster.
And I think that on that note, it's also worth mentioning the talk that's kind of in the middle of that list there, the Cilium Welcome Vision and Updates. This is going to be the first time we get to, as the Cilium project, now it's part of the CNCF, we get to run a maintainers session at Kubecon in person. So it's going to be a really great opportunity for people who are interested in the project to come and meet other maintainers, hear more about what we're planning on working on for the next few months, and folks who do want to get involved with the sort of development side. We would love to meet you, and not just development, any kind of contributions.
Right.
I'm super excited about the fact that we get to kind of meet the community who are working on this project. That'll be really fun.
I mean, I'm excited just to see what's to come, right? Like, that's my big thing. There's so much opportunity here, right?
There's, I mean, the eBPF day on Monday, I joined Isovalent because I'm so interested in the scope of the things that we can do with eBPF as a technology. For folks who are maybe watching and aren't familiar with eBPF, what it lets us do is program the kernel. We can dynamically change the way the kernel behaves, and that allows for networking capabilities. Cilium is pretty well known as a networking project, but it also allows us to inspect what's happening across an entire node from the kernel's perspective, and we can use that for security purposes. We can get tons of really interesting observability information out of it. So from Cilium's perspective, we're doing exciting things. On Monday's eBPF day, we're going to be hearing about lots of other really cool innovations taking advantage of eBPF, and I think that's going to be a really great day.
Yeah,
I'm really looking forward to that one too. I mean, one of the things that Liz and I got to actually participate, I think, in last week, was that we are trying to extend eBPF day to also include things that are kind of more hands-on and like kind of show you like people using eBPF and those sorts of things and like how it works. And so this is actually going to be a great opportunity for you, if you're leveraging Cilium in your EKS cluster, to kind of to see how things might go if things are programmed differently or challengingly. We worked with David Flanagan, Rockcode on Twitter and everywhere else, to do a clustered version of eBPF of eBPF day. So we had some attackers, which included Thomas Graff, our CTO, and we had our fixers, which are Liz and I and a few other folks. And we're going to be presenting that, and there will also be a panel involved in that at the end of the day at eBPF day. And then there's one other thing I wanted to point out that I think maybe isn't widely known, but if you have a virtual ticket to Kubecon, then you actually can participate in any of the co-located events for free.
Right? Oh, that's good.
Yeah. Really? Yeah. I didn't know that. Wow. Okay, cool.
So if you have an in-person event, I mean, if you're there in person, you do have to register to be able to get into the room where that is happening. But if you're virtual, then just jump right in. And we're going to have a Slack channel on the CNCF Slack that is Isovalent. No, wait, it's going to be, what is it? It's Kubecon-Cilium. That's what it is.
Okay.
So yeah, feel free to jump in there and ask questions. But yeah, all of these talks will be available to you and effectively simulcast. And of course, like after the show, you're going to be able to see all the recordings of everything. But there's a lot of really great stuff that we're going to be talking about. And the other thing I love about eBPF Day is that it's not just Cilium. It's, eBPF Day, right? So it's like literally talking, just like Liz pointed out, it's talking about all kinds of different interesting projects that are leveraging BPF today.
Yeah, I'm going to drop your Slack channel link in chat here. Like Liz, I first met you at like GopherCon 2017, and you did a talk about you did something with Go, and it just blew my mind. It was all about system calls, and it totally blew my mind. And like eBPF is totally like that extension on top of the kernel that just lets you do things in a secure and almost like native fashion to secure your cluster. It's really nice.
Yeah, it's that kind of ability to influence or measure or instrument applications without any change to the applications at all.
Yeah.
You
don't have to be reconfigured. They don't have to be restarted. With eBPF, we can inspect processes that are already running, which is a real sea change in the way that we instrument projects, and particularly in cloud native. And one of the interesting things we'll be talking about next week is Cilium service mesh. And much like any kind of observability or security tooling, service mesh typically until now has used sidecars to inject containers into the application, which is pretty transparent. You don't have to change the application, but you do have to change the YAML, the pod configuration. Right. And with Cilium service mesh, we don't have to do that. We're basically pulling the service mesh capabilities onto the node. The pod is completely unaware, doesn't need to know, but you can get the kind of instrumentation, the observability, the networking capabilities that we need from a service mesh, and in a much, much more efficient fashion. And it's much easier. It's many fewer moving parts than you would have in the sidecar model. So I've got to talk about that. Thomas is going to be on a panel at Service Mesh Day. So I'm expecting there will be quite a lot of interest in that, because we certainly had nearly 400 people who signed up to the Cilium Service Mesh beta program and have been telling us how they've been getting on with that. So hopefully we will hear even more from people, how they've been getting on and what they need, and having some interesting discussions about that.
That's awesome. Like a service mesh based on eBPF already like brings smiles to my faces, because you don't really have to touch your pods. And if you are like a lot of enterprises out there, there's some stuff in your environment where you kind of like set it and forget it. And like you might have migrated an old application over to Cube, and you did that and it was a lot of work, and now you're trying to like, oh, how can I improve or see, measure? You don't have to muck with it. You just lay this on top and off it goes. It can look at all the stats. It uses the Linux kernel under the hood, and it pulls in everything you need without you having to reprogram anything. It's lovely.
Yeah. And we have really great, metrics. We've got Prometheus metrics measuring all sorts of interesting points. So we can, show you Grafana dashboards with latency measurements and, packet drops and errors and all kinds of cool metrics. They're essentially out of the box for service mesh, because we already have them in Cilium for the network layer anyway. It's pretty cool.
So I actually saw the other day, there was a GitHub repo I came across. It was actually using eBPF to manage like power consumption. So you could identify which pod was taking the most energy. Like, that's crazy to me, but it's awesome. Like, think about all the energy savings we could do if we just measured it, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think,
one of my friends is quite involved in the Green Software Foundation, and she's been sort of saying, isn't there like an angle here around eBPF for just the reduction in the number of resources you need? Does that mean that it's essentially a greener way of running software? And I don't want to kind of overstate that, because to some extent, as engineers, we will use the resources that we're, things will expand to fill the resources that we have. But there is some truth in it. If you can do things more efficiently, it does make things more energy efficient. So,
go ahead.
One of the pieces that I think that is super interesting from the service mesh perspective about what we're able to accomplish here, that I think kind of highlights your point about like the neat thing that we're bringing to it with eBPF, is that like in the sidecar model, we're effectively like putting the application and the sidecar next to each other, and we're attracting all of the traffic from that application to the sidecar, and then forwarding that traffic to the to wherever the next destination is. In the Cilium model, in the Cilium service mesh model, we're changing that paradigm a little bit, right? We're basically leveraging eBPF at the kernel layer to basically take the traffic out of the socket from the application and transparently proxy it through that Envoy instance with that configured Envoy listener, and then forwarding the traffic after it comes out of that proxy toward wherever it's headed next, right? And this is like kind of leveraging the eBPF to do the magic of how we're actually going about this, right? And then the other piece of it, like you all have highlighted a few times, is that like since eBPF is such a rich context, it's so rich in context, right? That is really like one of the biggest pieces I see people using eBPF for today. And you're going to see us talking about that at eBPF Day. You're going to see us talking about that at Service Mesh Con with Thomas being on the panel. And we're going to be talking about it at Security Day. There's just, it's just amazing how much context we have. And now it's, our exercise in Service Mesh has really been about not necessarily finding new ways to do things, but also just figuring out how to present the amazing amount of context that we have in ways that people expect that data to be presented from a service mesh, right? We've had this data for a long time, right? You've been able to use Hubble Observe to see when there's a 200 or a 400 or a 50 or a 504 in an HTTP session between two endpoints in a cluster for quite some time, but we haven't actually expressed that as a metric that could be measured, and now we have, right? It's like that level of instrumentation has been around for the whole time. It's just a matter of like figuring out like how people want to consume it and making sure that we present it that way.
So how are you seeing people like use either the service mesh or just eBPF itself, or any of the things that we've talked about so far? Like, what are the normal use cases that you're seeing, or the most obvious ones, I guess?
Yeah, I think that I think the biggest use case that I see like most frequently, hands down, is that like when people are leveraging this as a CNI, they get a level of visibility just out of the box that just blows them away, right? Being able to actually like a lot of more secure environments now are doing things where they don't allow for like these things like TCP cap or TCP dump and those sorts of things inside of containers, which is a good security move, right? That's a reasonable security posture to have. But what it means is that like a lot of folks who are coming from kind of an older development world where they're trying to understand like wire protocol, like what's actually happening on this application? Are these two things able to communicate? Like, is there latency between them? Like, what's actually going to give me as much information about the network, that piece I can't really see between those applications as you can? And they find that it's very difficult to do in a Kubernetes environment in general with a lot of the other CNIs that we see out there. So with Cilium, when you install Cilium and then you do Cilium Hubble enable, and then you like leverage Hubble to actually just see what's happening, and maybe you turn on a parser, like you turn on an HTTP parser or you turn on the DNS parser, and you're able to see those DNS queries and what the responses were, and like whether it's a text domain, it's like that level of visibility is like still is still the use case that just completely blows people out of the water every single time.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And in the service mesh, we did a survey and we were asking people what features they were most interested in, what was a must-have. Observability was number one by some distance.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, and it's very interesting how much of that we just already had through Hubble.
Yeah.
That's amazing. What I guess, the eBPF, does it have any kind of equivalent in history, right? Like, it doesn't really. This is like a game changer, in my opinion. There hasn't been this level of ease of getting to this context.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think there's a historical equivalent because it's so broad. You can hook eBPF programs in literally anywhere into the kernel. And I think this is one of the things that isn't necessarily super well understood about eBPF yet, and something I'm going to be talking about at SecurityCon, because we've seen projects using eBPF to intercept system calls, which is, really useful and a good way of instrumenting what an application is trying to do. But it has limitations. And that's just like the surface layer. We can hook eBPF programs into anywhere, thousands and thousands of places. And really, the art of eBPF is knowing where to hook and what information you're going to get in those different points. So being able to, for example, hook into the right places to spot, let's say, file access without being vulnerable to time of check to time of use vulnerabilities that have been well known in kind of the community for, it is well known that things like, setcomp or ptrace, if you're hooking in at the syscore entry level, there is time for a user space thread to modify a parameter before the kernel has actually copied that parameter.
Wow.
But if you hook into the right part of the kernel after that parameter has been copied into kernel memory, you're not vulnerable. So that's something I'm going to be talking about on Tuesday.
That's intense. Yeah, no, there are a lot of, there's 2 day zeros at Kubecon this year, so it's a little confusing. Day 0, day 0, 0 is what I'm calling it.
When is -1? I don't know.
I don't know. Like, it feels weird, the -1 thing. Like, it should
actually, I mean, like elevators in Europe, that's how they do it, right? If there's like a floor below the ground level, it's like 0 and then -1, -2.
Yeah,
really?
Is that not a global thing?
Oh, no. I've never seen that. Usually it's like L, or something else, like lower level, that kind of thing.
Oh, that's true. You quite often have like G or something for.
Some places have like ground level, and
So I was going to say,
go ahead.
I was going to add a little bit of context around like have we done this before thing, and I think that like one of the things that one of the things I wanted to point out was that we have. In the past, we've done quite a bit of work to kind of change the entry point of things, right? So when we're thinking about service mesh, for example, we're thinking about, can we insert something that will insert itself sort of into the application layer so we can get better visibility of what's happening from that application without having to instrument the application, right? And that was kind of a step forward from the way that we think about, how do we instrument applications? How can we monitor these things? And that's been kind of the direction that, and we've done that over and over again, right? Like, I think with Cilium as a CNI and what we're trying to accomplish here with eBPF, we're basically moving quite a lot of the functions that have traditionally been lower level things. Like, for example, the entry point into the network, the ability to define things like, like at what point do you enforce things like network policy, right? Traditionally, we've enforced network policy, after the packet has left the net, is at some point on the network.
It's already in here. Yeah, exactly.
But with eBPF, we can enforce that network policy at the socket layer. We can determine before this is a packet whether it should be allowed egress.
That's impressive.
Right. Like, and if you think about that, like one of the other ones that really kind of blew my mind, I was listening to a good friend, John Fastament here at Isovalent, who's one of the kernel hackers on the Linux kernel in the eBPF space, and he was pointing out like another paradigm that we've broken that I just is still kind of wrapping my head around as a networking guy. He says, when we evaluate networking equipment, whether they be a firewall or a router or a switch, we think about this. We measure its performance in packets per second.
PPS, yeah, totally.
So.
How many of those packets are needed?
Well, we can affect this before it's a packet.
Yeah, like that's amazing. that is truly amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is really...
the capabilities I see are just like it. I can't describe them because they're just so like the energy savings story, right? Like that in and of itself is like a mind blowing thing. But the idea that you can stop something from even occurring on your network before like it hits a network device potentially or sometime shortly thereafter, right? Like edge firewall into your cluster kind of thing. But yeah, like, and it's not just at the boundary anymore where you apply policy. It's all the way through the stack where you can apply policy.
Right up at the application layer, right?
Yeah.
We can write policy that allows for an application, just like in one of the other policy use cases for service mesh are the idea that you could write a rule that says this application can connect to this API serviced by this other application, but only at these specific paths, right? That's like a layer 7 policy rule.
Yeah, that's like next to impossible to enforce on on an existing thing.
Yeah. And we can do that with Cilium network policy without sidecars. And we've been doing that, right? That's been layer 7 policy has been around for quite some time. Because again, our entry point is the application layer, right? Like we're able to like parse everything about what's happening at that traffic right at the kernel layer and then determine whether to allow or deny that traffic right there.
And I think another interesting thing that comes out of Cilium's network kind of, being present at the network layer, but also having this knowledge of Kubernetes is multi-cluster support.
Yeah.
So the cluster mesh support in Cilium is so kind of natural in the sense that you declare a service in one cluster, you just declare a service in the same service in another cluster, you say they're global services. If the cluster, you just connect the clusters together and they are magically part of the same service.
Nice.
And I think that's really interesting for things like EKS anywhere. If you've got an on-prem cluster and a cloud provider cluster and you can share services across them in this very, it's almost too easy kind of a way.
No weird port opening, no weird firewall rules. It's just,
well, I mean, there's a little bit of firewall in the sense that you have to be able, the clusters have to be able to
they have to talk to each other. Yeah.
And that's, for me, that's typically been the most difficult bit to set up. And then once your clusters can actually access, they can connect to each other, getting the services, acting normal, in concert across those services is kind of trivially easy.
That's just, I mean, that's a hard problem to solve, having these workloads span between, cloud and, on-prem data centers or, comm closet and a building somewhere kind of thing, right? Like that's been the hardest part of multi-cluster is getting those services to kind of work in harmony. Data gravity also, but now you can kind of pretty easily kind of spread that out across anywhere really. And
and I think it's because of this, because of Cilium's presence at the kind of Kubernetes identity layer, so we can know that, okay, this is a service and it's marked as global, so I should tell all my other cluster friends about it. And this is how we do it. It's with we have like an etcd sort of shared data of like what are global services on each cluster, and then at the network layer they're just endpoints. They're all just endpoints from Cilium's point of view.
And you can set things like affinity, right? So like in EKS anywhere, the model is that you can actually build task-based clusters, right? Your idea, leveraging cluster API, is that you could spin up a cluster for maybe in different regions, maybe for different purposes, maybe for different, like, a variety of different a variety of different decision points about why you might create a cluster. And with cluster mesh, basically you could determine like I will host the Vault instance in this cluster, where I can actually keep track of like what's exactly accessing Vault, regardless of the consumer. And then I will share that Vault instance with all of the other application clusters so that they can go to Vault and get the keys that they need to be able to, securely grab credentials and those sorts of things, right?
And
that way, I don't have to disperse this everywhere. I could actually, I could centralize that service.
We should talk like after our day 0 events, because I'm doing GitOpsCon, and secrets management is like the hardest part of GitOps right now. And we're trying to find like ways around this problem. And a lot of it is like layering different tooling on top of each other, which I don't necessarily like, but just because it increases complexity. But maybe there's something GitOps can do with eBPF to make that secret distribution easier. And
we do have some use cases where we've actually leveraged eBPF to effectively, how you can actually do it like a transparent proxy thing where you're using a corporate CA to sign for all certificates that you're going to issue to. And so you can actually write policy that says, like this application can reach these FQDNs, and you want to assure that that's the case because you want to be able to effectively, you want to inspect the server name and make sure that like the thing you're connecting to is actually what it is based at the TLS layer. So we do have a couple of different use cases that with Cilium that can be leveraged in EKS Anywhere and everywhere else to really kind of prove that out. And that would give you the ability to like really ensure that even if somebody writes a policy that says, you know, this application can actually reach these pieces and they're all TLS encrypted, that we're able to use that server name to validate that that's actually correct.
Amazing. All right, well, we're out of time here, but I know you all will be at Kubecon EU in Valencia, and you have 2 booths, the Cilium booth and then the Isovalent booth. Anything else you want to mention before we drop off here?
If you see somebody like this wearing a hat like this, come say hello. I have stickers.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm coming for your stickers.
We should have books. We should have some books to give away. There's little O'Reilly reports. I've just done one about what eBPF is, and our colleague Natalia and Jed Salazar has done one about security observability. So hopefully those will have arrived in Valencia before us, and we'll be able to give them away, which will be exciting.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I can't wait. Like, this has been a great session, folks. Check out eBPF, check out Cilium, see what it can do for you. Think about it in the context of on-prem and cloud, blending the two together. And thank you both so much for coming on and spending the half hour with me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us, Chris.
Have a good day, everybody. Take it easy.